Welcome to Civics in a Year, the podcast that makes civic literacy fast, accessible, and surprisingly engaging. In just 10 minutes an episode, we'll tackle one of 250 essential questions about American democracy, how it works, why it matters, and what it means for you. Whether you're a student, a teacher, or just someone who wants to better understand your country and your rights, you're in the right place. Civics in a Year is powered by the Civic Literacy Curriculum from the Center for American Civics and is produced in partnership with the School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership at Arizona State University. Imagine sitting in your living room on a hot August night in 1974. The television is on. 3 major networks are carrying the same image, the Oval Office. Americans already know something serious is coming. Rumors have spread all day through newspapers, radio broadcasts, and conversations at work. We all know the president's going to speak, not about war, not about the economy, not about foreign policy, but about himself. And then President Nixon begins talking. He has a calm voice, a careful posture, and a measured tone. For millions of Americans, this starts to feel unreal because for the first time in American history, a president is about to resign. But to understand why this speech matters so much, we need to go back 2 years earlier, back before the resignation or impeachment hearings, back before the phrase Watergate became such a huge part of American history. In 1972, Richard Nixon looked unstoppable. He was experienced, disciplined, and politically powerful. The United States had opened relations with China under his leadership. The Vietnam War was slowly winding down, and he had just won re-election in a landslide. He won 49 states. One of the biggest victories in presidential history. And from the outside, Nixon seemed secure. But inside the White House, fear and paranoia had taken root. Nixon and many of his advisors believed enemies were everywhere. Political opponents, protesters, journalists, even some government officials. And that fear helped create one of the biggest political scandals in American history. On June 17, 1972, police arrested 5 men inside the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate complex in Washington, D.C. The burglars carried cameras, recording devices, and rolls of cash. At first, the break-in seemed strange but small, just another campaign scandal. But 2 young reporters at the Washington Post, Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, kept digging. These deeper investigations really started to make the story become even stranger. Money connected the burglars to Nixon's re-election campaign. Witnesses started talking, government officials were lying, evidence disappeared, and slowly Americans began to realize this is not just a burglary, it's a cover-up. Then came the discovery that changed everything. Inside the White House, President Nixon had secretly recorded conversations inside the Oval Office. These conversations included political discussions, strategy sessions, and private conversations, and they were all captured on tape. Suddenly, investigators were no longer relying on witnesses or rumors. They wanted the president's own words. But Nixon refused to hand over the tapes. He argued that presidents need privacy to govern effectively. He claimed executive privilege protected these conversations. And that fight went all the way to the Supreme Court. And in July 1974, the court ruled unanimously against him. Even the president has to obey the law. When Nixon finally released the tapes, one recording destroyed what remained of his support. On the tape, recorded only days after the Watergate break-in, Nixon discussed ways to stop the FBI investigation. The evidence was undeniable. Republican leaders went to the White House and delivered the message directly. The presidency was over. If Nixon stayed, Congress would impeach him and remove him from office. Now, picture the White House on August 8, 1974. Staff members are moving quietly through the halls, telephones constantly ringing. Reporters are crowded outside the gate, and cabinet members are waiting anxiously. Inside the Oval Office, President Nixon prepares for one final address. At 9 p.m. Eastern Time, the cameras went live. Nixon looks tired. Not emotional exactly, but somehow heavier. As though the pressure of 2 years has settled onto his shoulders all at once. He begins carefully, almost formally, discussing foreign policy achievements and unfinished work. Then he arrives at the sentence the nation has been waiting for. He says, "I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow." Just one sentence. No dramatic music or no applause. Nobody interrupts him. But in living rooms across the country, people stare at their television in shock. Some people cry. Some Americans feel angry. Others feel relieved. Some are heartbroken because they had supported Nixon for years. And honestly, many felt simply exhausted. The country had spent months watching hearings, reading headlines, and wondering whether its president had committed crimes. Now the answer seemed unavoidable. But Nixon was not ready to completely surrender his version of the story. During the speech, he defended himself repeatedly. At one point, he declared, "I have never been a quitter." It is one of the most revealing lines in the entire address. Nixon wanted Americans to see resignation not as defeat, but as sacrifice. He argued that continuing the political fight would damage the country further. He then stopped short of fully admitting wrongdoing. The tension runs throughout the speech. Nixon accepted political reality, but he still fought to preserve his legacy. And maybe that is part of what makes this address so human. It's not a perfect speech. It's not this triumphant thing. It's a man trying to hold on to dignity while watching power slip away in real time. The next morning, August 9th, Nixon met with White House staff for the final time. Many openly cried. Some staff members had worked with him for years. Despite the scandal, they admired his intelligence, his determination, and his political skill. Nixon himself became emotional during the farewell. Then he and First Lady Pat Nixon walked across the South Lawn toward the presidential helicopter. Before boarding, Nixon turned back toward the crowd. He raised both arms in his familiar victory gesture, and then he disappeared into the helicopter doorway. Minutes later, the aircraft lifted up from the White House lawn. Gerald Ford became the president, and America entered a new chapter. Watergate changed the country permanently. Trust in government had collapsed. Americans became more skeptical of political leaders. Journalists gained new influence and prestige. And Congress passed reforms designed to limit abuses of power. But beyond politics, Nixon's resignation revealed something deeper about the American constitutional systems. The court, Congress, and press all worked. The peaceful transfer of power worked. The Constitution held, and not because leaders are perfect or because the system avoided crisis, but because institutions, laws, and civic pressure proved stronger than one individual president. Today, Nixon's resignation address remains one of the most important presidential speeches in American history because it forces Americans to wrestle with difficult questions. How should democracy respond when leaders abuse power? What responsibilities belong to journalists, judges, and Congress? And can public trust recover after a political scandal? And lastly, what does accountability actually look like in a constitutional system? Those questions don't end in 1974. In many ways, they're still with us. Thanks for listening to Civics in a Year. Join us next time as we continue to explore the people, speeches, and moments that help shape American democracy. Thanks for joining us on another episode of Civics in a Year. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and share it with someone who cares about a constitutional republic as much as you do. For more episodes, resources, and updates, follow us on social media or visit us at civics.asu.edu. Make sure to check out the show notes for any relevant links. Special thanks to the United States Marine Band for their performance of the Stars and Stripes Forever. Let's keep building a stronger constitutional republic, one episode at a time.